Those 7 words landed in the middle of Christmas dinner like a hammer against glass. 23 people sat frozen around that table. My own son had just said it out loud, in front of his in-laws, in front of his friends, in front of my 2 grandchildren who stared at me with wide, confused eyes, waiting to see what an old man does when his family throws him away in public. I stood up slowly. My 68-year-old hands were steady, steadier than they had been in months, and I smiled at him the way you smile at a stranger who just cut in line. I said, "I understand completely, Preston." The whole room went silent. Even the neighbors across the street could see the shape of it through their windows as I walked to my truck alone. What none of them knew was that I had been recording every single conversation in that house for 6 months. What Preston really did not know was that he had been living inside my house the entire time, because my name, and only my name, was still on every deed, every document, every piece of paper that actually mattered. My name is Grant Sullivan, and this is the story of how I taught my only son the most expensive lesson of his life. 48 hours after that dinner, the sheriff knocked on his door. But I was not broken that night driving home in the cold. I was planning, and planning is the one thing 30 years of quiet, careful men are very good at. Before I take you back to where this all started, I want you to picture something. Picture spending 40 years pulling wire through office buildings, fixing broken outlets for neighbors on the weekend, saving every extra dollar so that one day you and your wife could finally rest. Now picture watching that same wife fight cancer for 14 months, losing a little more of her every single week, until the woman who used to fill your house with laughter cannot even remember your name some mornings. My wife, Eleanor, died on a Tuesday in October. I remember the color of the sky that day better than I remember most years of my life. Our son Preston was 26 then, freshly out of college, full of big plans and an empty bank account, and the funeral alone cost $18,000, money I had quietly set aside for a retirement cruise Eleanor and I always talked about, but never took. I paid every cent of it without blinking. Because that is what fathers do. And I told Preston not to worry about the money, to just focus on grieving his mother while I figured the rest out. I worked double shifts at the electrical company after that, running wire through cold office buildings during the week and fixing outlets for neighbors on the weekends, because keeping my hands busy was the only thing that kept my mind from wandering back into that empty house Eleanor used to fill with noise. Preston moved back in with me temporarily after the funeral. Temporarily turned into 2 full years. I cooked his meals, washed his clothes, sat with him at night while he cried about his mother. And slowly, quietly, I learned how to live in a house that no longer had her laugh echoing through it. When Preston met a real estate agent named Vanessa in 2019, I was genuinely happy for him. She was college-educated, sharp, had a smile that could sell ice to a snowman, and I told myself my son had finally found something good after everything we had lost. They married that fall in a ceremony I paid $12,000 for, and at the reception Preston hugged me and said, "You have given me everything, Dad. I will never forget this." I remember believing him completely. I had made a promise to Eleanor on the day she died, a simple promise, that I would take care of our boy until he could stand fully on his own 2 feet. For a long time, I thought I had kept that promise. I was about to find out how wrong I really was. In the spring of 2020, Preston and Vanessa sat at my kitchen table with a stack of real estate listings spread out in front of them. They had found their dream house on a street called Maple Grove, 4 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, the kind of neighborhood you picture raising grandchildren in. The price tag was $385,000, and Preston admitted, hands fidgeting around his coffee mug, that they simply could not afford the 20% down payment the bank was demanding, which came out to $77,000 they did not have. Vanessa leaned forward with that same practiced real estate smile and said, "Preston mentioned you might consider helping us out with a loan." I looked at their young, hopeful faces and thought about Eleanor, about how badly she would have wanted our son settled into a real home instead of bouncing between rented apartments for the rest of his life. My pension had built up steadily over 40 years, and Eleanor's life insurance was still sitting untouched in a set of certificates of deposit. I told them I would handle the entire down payment myself, and that they should think of it as an early inheritance. Their faces lit up like it was Christmas morning already. The closing happened 3 weeks later. My longtime attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Diane Whitfield, who had handled Eleanor's estate and knew my finances better than almost anyone alive, sat across the table with us at the title company. During a short break, she pulled me aside and said quietly, "Grant, keep the deed in your name for now, purely for tax reasons, and transfer it to them later once their credit improves." I trusted her completely, and I signed the paperwork exactly the way she suggested. My name went on that deed as the sole legal owner. Preston and Vanessa got the keys and moved in thinking they now owned their little piece of the American dream. What my son did not understand about that paperwork is that it would end up making all the difference 6 years later, in a way none of us could have predicted that hopeful spring afternoon. The changes crept in slowly, the way ivy grows over a fence without you noticing until one day the whole thing is covered. Preston used to call me twice a week, just to check in on his old man. After the wedding, those calls dropped down to once a month, then eventually only on holidays. Vanessa's influence spread through our conversations quietly and completely. Whenever I offered a bit of financial advice, Preston would say, "Dad is just old school. You would not understand his generation." And Vanessa would flash that same perfect smile and say, "Of course, Mr. Sullivan. You have already done so much for us," while her eyes stayed as cold as a winter pond. On Christmas in 2021, they invited me over for dinner. I brought gifts for everyone, told old stories about my work as an electrician, shared memories of Eleanor's holiday traditions, and the whole time Vanessa sat checking her phone under the table while Preston talked about mortgage rates like I was not even in the room. Later I overheard Vanessa in the kitchen tell Preston, "Your father looks tired. Maybe he should think about downsizing. That big house must be hard for him to maintain at his age." And Preston simply nodded and said, "Yeah, Dad is not getting any younger." I stayed quiet in the living room, listening, noticing how they had started talking around me instead of to me. Eleanor used to tell me the quietest people hear the most important conversations, and she was right about that, the same way she was right about most things in life. That was the moment I decided to start paying much closer attention. And what I began hearing after that made my blood run cold with a disappointment I had never felt before. I drove to an electronics store one afternoon and told the young clerk I wanted something small to record family stories for my own memory, which was not entirely a lie. He showed me a compact digital voice recorder, small enough to hide inside a shirt pocket, with a battery that lasted 12 hours and audio clear enough to pick up a whisper from across a room. I paid $68 for it, which felt like a very small price for the peace of mind it eventually bought me. I practiced with it at home first, sitting in Eleanor's old chair, learning every button, testing how far it could pick up sound. It caught full conversations from the kitchen while I sat quietly in the living room, and I remember thinking how strange it was that technology could do that now. My first real test came the following Sunday, when Preston and Vanessa stopped by to borrow my truck to move some furniture. I clipped the recorder to my belt without thinking twice and told them to be careful with the tailgate, since it sometimes stuck. Preston answered sharply, "We know how to handle a truck, Dad," in a tone I barely recognized from the boy I raised. After they left that day, I played the recording back and heard, clear as a bell, a whispered conversation in my own driveway about getting the old man to sell this place eventually. That single recording changed something in me permanently, and from that day forward I documented everything, every visit, every phone call, every casual comment that revealed exactly what they thought of the man who had given them their home, their wedding, and years of quiet sacrifice. Thanksgiving that year brought new evidence I never wanted to find. Preston and Vanessa came by to use my larger oven for their turkey, and I stayed busy in the garage organizing tools, staying politely out of their way while the recorder sat silently in my shirt pocket. They thought I could not hear them from the kitchen. Vanessa's real estate training showed clearly when she said, "Your father's house is worth at least $400,000 now, maybe more with the market the way it is." Preston answered, "He will leave it to me eventually. We just have to wait." And Vanessa lowered her voice and said, "Waiting is for people without options. Honey, I have been researching property transfers. There are ways to handle this sooner." Preston asked what kind of ways, and she explained, power of attorney forms, medical necessity claims. If we can show he is becoming incapacitated, we could petition for guardianship and transfer his assets for his own protection. My hands froze on the toolbox in front of me. A cold feeling crawled slowly up my spine like a fog rolling in off the water. Preston hesitated and said that seemed wrong, but his voice carried doubt instead of any real conviction, and Vanessa simply replied that it was practical, that he was almost 70 now, and these things needed proper planning, that she knew people at the courthouse and could have the forms ready ahead of time. That single recording, my seventh one, changed everything for me. I finally understood that my son's wife was not simply impatient. She was calculating, methodical, and my own son was quietly becoming her willing student in betrayal. I drove to Diane Whitfield's law office the following Monday morning and asked for an urgent meeting. Her office smelled like old leather and strong coffee, the same as it had years earlier when she helped me through Eleanor's estate. I played her the Thanksgiving recording, and I watched her expression darken with every second of it, until the pen in her hand actually snapped from how hard she was gripping it. She told me plainly, "This is elder abuse conspiracy, Grant. This is the planning stage of financial exploitation, and it is all documented on your recorder." She opened a thick folder and reminded me that back in 2020, I had made the smart choice that the deed to the house was still legally in my name, meaning Preston had no legitimate claim to that property at all. Relief moved through me like warm sunlight, breaking through a long winter. But she warned me they could still cause real problems through false medical claims, forged signatures, or fraudulent power of attorney forms, and that I needed to keep building the case with more recordings and a clear pattern of intent before doing anything at all. She handed me a card for a private investigator just in case, and told me that if they ever forged my signature on anything, we would have grounds for criminal fraud charges. Her instructions were simple. Keep recording. Keep documenting. Let them expose themselves completely. Then, when they finally made their move, we would be ready with overwhelming evidence and full legal authority behind us. The next 6 months of recordings painted a picture I wished with everything in me did not exist. Every Sunday visit, every phone call, every casual dinner conversation revealed new layers of disrespect I never imagined coming from my own son. One recording caught Preston complaining about wasting gas money visiting the old man every week. Another caught Vanessa coaching him on keeping dad dependent so he does not make rash decisions about the house. Another caught Preston agreeing that his father was probably getting forgetful, maybe early dementia setting in, when the truth was I was not forgetful at all, I was simply heartbroken. I transcribed every single conversation into a composition notebook Eleanor had given me years earlier, complete with dates and exact quotes, because Diane insisted that juries respond to paperwork, that it makes everything feel real and official. Vanessa began bringing deed transfer forms to Sunday dinners, always left casually on my kitchen counter with helpful sticky notes showing exactly where to sign. I never once signed a single one of them, but I kept every form as evidence of their intent to defraud me. Preston grew bolder with every passing month, making little comments about my driving, my memory, my ability to manage my own finances, until by that Thanksgiving I had 52 recordings, 16 attempted fraud documents, and one full notebook documenting elder abuse in careful, dated detail. My son and his wife had built their own prison out of nothing but their own words. December brought a new kind of humiliation. Preston started handing me lists, not requests anymore, but commands. He handed me a folded piece of paper one afternoon and said, "Vanessa made a list of things you can help with this week. The gutters need cleaning, the driveway needs sealing, and the garage could use some organizing." I read through 12 tasks, every single one of them physical labor, every single one at their house, the very house I had bought them. I said carefully that these were big jobs for a 68-year-old man, and Preston answered that I was still strong as an ox, that retired people needed projects anyway, and Vanessa appeared from the kitchen wiping her hands on a towel and said sweetly, "Mr. Sullivan, we really do appreciate you helping out. It saves us so much money on handyman services." My recorder captured every single word. I spent that Tuesday cleaning their gutters, Wednesday sealing their driveway, Thursday organizing tools in their garage, while the two of them sat inside watching television. My back ached deep and tight, my hands cramped around unfamiliar tools I was not used to holding anymore. But I kept working, and I kept recording, and I kept quietly building the case that would eventually set me free. Thanksgiving that year showed me exactly where I now stood in the family. Vanessa's parents flew in from out of state, her college friends drove in from out of town, and 21 people gathered to watch me serve them like hired help. Preston called from the living room, where football played loudly on a giant television, asking if I could pull the turkey out of the oven. I carried a 20-pound bird alone to their dining table while they laughed at something on the screen. Vanessa's mother asked sweetly if I would mind carving since I seemed so capable in the kitchen. I carved turkey for 21 people, filled water glasses, cleared plates, and washed every pot afterward, while the family enjoyed coffee and dessert without me. I overheard Vanessa's friend Janet whisper, "Is that your father?" and Vanessa answer casually, "Yes. He loves helping out. Keeps him busy now that he is retired. We worry he would just sit around otherwise." Preston found me at 10 at night, still scrubbing their kitchen, and thanked me for taking the pressure off with hosting, without once offering to help or acknowledging the 8 hours I had just spent serving his guests. My recorder caught the two of them afterward congratulating themselves, Preston saying, "Dad did not complain once. He is finally accepting his place here." That December, my credit card bills started showing charges I never made, hundreds of dollars at stores near Preston's house, on dates when I had been at their property working. The fraud department at my bank told me the charges required a physical card and a correct PIN number. And I realized my wallet had been sitting openly on their kitchen counter every single day I worked there. I drove over that same afternoon with my recorder running and noticed Vanessa wearing an expensive new winter coat. When I commented on it, she laughed and said Preston surprised her with it, that she deserved something nice after all her hard work. It was the exact amount charged to my card 3 days earlier. The paper trail told the whole story clearly: identity theft, financial elder abuse, every charge documented with dates and locations that proved theft beyond any doubt. Then came the phone call on December 20th. Formal and cold. Preston inviting me to Christmas dinner at 3 sharp, telling me not to bring anything, that they had everything handled, and that I should not buy the grandchildren anything expensive since they already had enough toys. The call lasted 90 seconds. No warmth. No excitement. Just logistics delivered like a business memo. I spent Christmas Eve wrapping presents anyway for 2 grandchildren I barely recognized anymore and how they treated me. 8-year-old Chloe, who used to sit on my lap while I read to her, and 6-year-old Mason, who used to help me feed birds in my backyard. Now they called me Grandfather Grant, like I was a stranger in a suit. On Christmas morning I dressed carefully, clean shirt, pressed pants, Eleanor's favorite tie still hanging in my closet after all these years, and I slipped the recorder into my jacket pocket, fully charged, ready for whatever conversation was waiting for me. Something told me, driving those 12 minutes to their house, that this would be my last Christmas as part of that family, and I was not entirely wrong. 23 cars lined their street that morning. I parked 3 houses down and walked slowly up the driveway. Preston opened the door before I even knocked, said, "Hey, Dad, come on in," with no hug and no Merry Christmas, like I was delivering a package. Inside, Vanessa's parents held court by the fireplace. Her college friends clustered around the kitchen island with wine glasses discussing property values, and Chloe and Mason sat surrounded by mountains of expensive presents that made my small gifts of art supplies and building blocks look shabby beside them. Chloe thanked me politely for the presents. No hug, no excitement, just careful distance clearly coached into her by parents who wanted to keep her away from me. Vanessa appeared in a new cashmere sweater and designer jewelry and told me the kitchen could use some attention if I did not mind helping out, which was never really a question at all. I found their sink piled high with breakfast dishes for 23 people, and I stood there alone washing pots and glasses for the next 2 hours while laughter drifted in from the next room. Vanessa's mother announced loudly what a blessing I was, so helpful in the kitchen, so lucky Preston had a father like that, and Preston simply answered that I liked staying busy, that retirement could be boring otherwise. Little Chloe wandered over around 4 in the afternoon and asked innocently, "Mommy said you like washing dishes because you are used to being alone." My hands stopped moving completely in the warm water. Used to being alone, as if isolation had been my own choice instead of something they had carefully built around me one Sunday at a time. I told her gently to go play with her new toys, that I would join them soon, but soon never came, because more dishes kept arriving, and Vanessa kept checking on my progress, saying things like, "You are doing great, Mr. Sullivan. We really appreciate you taking care of the kitchen work," never once helping with the dishes, never once contributing, just handling the manual labor nobody else wanted. Then I heard my name drift in clearly from the dining room, wine having loosened their voices enough to forget how far sound could travel. Vanessa was telling her friend Janet that Preston's father was becoming such a burden that he showed up every Sunday expecting attention like they did not have their own lives. And Janet answered that her own mother went through a clingy phase before they found her a nice assisted living place. Vanessa said that was exactly what she and Preston had been discussing, that there were some beautiful senior communities nearby, much more appropriate for someone his age. Preston chimed in that Dad got confused about boundaries sometimes, that they had talked about setting firmer limits. Vanessa added that the house situation complicated things, that he was living alone in that big place, not really capable of maintaining it properly anymore, and Janet asked if they could convince him to sell, to which Preston answered that they were working on it, that Vanessa had been handling some of the paperwork already to make transitions easier when the time came. My grip tightened around the dish towel in my hand. Paperwork. The very same deed transfer form she had been leaving on my counter for months. That recording, my 52nd, was the last piece of evidence I would ever need, because I had just heard them confess out loud to conspiracy, to elder abuse planning, to intent to commit fraud, all captured in perfectly clear digital audio while they believed I was safely tucked away in their kitchen. At 5:30, Preston finally appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing an expression that looked rehearsed rather than genuine. He asked if we could talk, and I dried my hands and followed him into the living room, where 23 people sat in uncomfortable silence, Vanessa's family, Preston's friends, and my 2 grandchildren staring at me with wide, confused eyes. Preston began, his voice carrying across the room, saying we have been discussing some changes that need to happen. A fork clattered somewhere against a plate. A wine glass clinked against a table. And then he said the words that would echo in my mind for the rest of my life. You are not welcome here anymore. Dad, Vanessa, and I have decided we need space from your constant visits and demands for attention. The words hit like physical blows. Not welcome. In the very house I had bought them. On Christmas. In front of my grandchildren. After 8 straight hours of washing their dishes and serving their guests. I heard myself answer. Calm. Almost grateful. I understand completely, son. Preston looked genuinely surprised by how steady I sounded. Vanessa smiled that same real estate agent smile, satisfied with what she believed was a clean, successful manipulation, and added that I would always be welcome to call before visiting, that they just needed better boundaries going forward. Little Mason started crying quietly. Chloe stared down at her hands. The other guests studied their plates, uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding in front of them. I walked past their Christmas tree and out their front door while 23 people watched me leave in complete silence. The December air bit at my face as I walked down that driveway one last time. Behind me, the house glowed with Christmas lights I had helped hang myself back in November. My neighbor Denise Coleman stood at her mailbox pretending to check for late deliveries, and she called out softly asking if everything was all right. I told her everything was perfect, better than perfect actually, and I meant every word of it. My truck started easily despite the cold, the heater slowly warming my hands as I pulled away from that street for what I already knew would be the last time. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller and smaller, until the lights blurred into just another decoration on just another street. The recorder in my pocket had captured everything. Every cruel word, every calculated dismissal, every public humiliation witnessed by 23 people who now knew exactly what kind of man my son had become. I drove home slowly with Christmas music playing softly on the radio, Eleanor's photo smiling at me from the dashboard where I had kept it since her funeral. I told her picture that she would have been proud of how I handled that. No shouting, no scene, just quiet dignity, while they destroyed themselves entirely with their own words. What none of them realized was that Monday morning would change absolutely everything. Because a man who spent 40 years working with electricity understands something most people never do. That power builds slowly, travels through unexpected circuits, and delivers exactly the voltage needed the moment the switch finally gets thrown. That Sunday night I sat at Eleanor's old kitchen table with 6 months of evidence spread out in front of me like a road map leading straight to justice. 52 audio files sat organized on my laptop, each one labeled with its date and a short summary. My composition notebook lay open to page after page of transcribed conversations, showing a clear and damning pattern: first disrespect and dismissal, then coaching on manipulation, then financial fraud planning, and finally full-blown elder abuse conspiracy. This was not sudden greed or a single moment of weakness. This had been calculated for months. Beside my laptop sat a stack of credit card statements showing $12,000 in fraudulent charges, along with 3 forged deed transfer forms bearing a signature that was not mine, no matter how carefully someone had practiced copying it. I opened Eleanor's old jewelry box and looked at her engagement ring, the one I had saved 3 months of wages to buy back in 1976, sitting quietly beside a stack of bank statements for an account neither Preston nor Vanessa ever knew existed, an account holding $87,000 of Eleanor's untouched life insurance money, earning steady interest for 6 years, while I lived modestly off my pension. I called Diane Whitfield that night and left an urgent voicemail requesting a meeting first thing Monday morning. Diane was waiting for me at her office at 7 that next morning, and I brought the box of evidence with me along with a determination that had replaced every bit of the heartbreak I carried home from Christmas dinner. She played recording after recording, her expression growing darker each time, and when she reviewed the forged deed transfer forms under a magnifying glass, she confirmed instantly that the signatures were fraudulent, that handwriting experts could prove it in minutes. The credit card fraud made her whistle low under her breath. $12,000 over 6 months, which she said qualified as felony theft in our state, combined with the forgery attempts amounting to serious criminal charges. She began dialing the district attorney's office right there in front of me, explaining that we needed to open a criminal investigation immediately and file civil eviction proceedings right behind it. When I asked about eviction, she reminded me plainly that I owned the house, that Preston and Vanessa were tenants without any lease agreement whatsoever, and that we could have them legally removed within 72 hours if they refused to leave on their own. I signed the paperwork she handed me that morning, granting power of attorney for the legal proceedings ahead. And just like that, the wheels of justice started turning. Wheels that once set in motion do not stop until every legal remedy has been exhausted and every consequence has been delivered in full. Tuesday morning I gave them one last chance. I called Preston's house at 8 and let the recorder run, hoping against everything I knew by then for some flicker of an apology. Preston answered coldly asking what I wanted, and I told him I wanted to see if we could work things out before things went too far. He said there was nothing to work out, that I needed to respect their boundaries, and Vanessa, clearly on speaker, added that my behavior at Christmas showed exactly why they needed distance, that I could not even follow simple instructions to stay in the kitchen. I told her I had washed dishes for 8 hours, and she said they appreciated that, but that I kept trying to insert myself into conversations that did not concern me. Preston told me flatly to accept that things had changed, that they were not responsible for entertaining me every weekend. I said softly that I loved them both, that if they ever wanted to rebuild our relationship with mutual respect, my door would always be open. Vanessa actually laughed, forgetting apparently that I could still hear her, telling Preston that the senile old fool still did not get it, that he thought this was negotiable. Preston told me to lose their number, to find friends my own age, to stop trying to force myself into their family time. Then the line went dead. That single phone call sealed their fate completely, because I had offered them real mercy, a genuine chance to apologize and start over, and they had answered with mockery and cold dismissal of the man who had given them everything they owned. Wednesday morning, Diane and I walked into the district attorney's office together, and a sharp, no-nonsense prosecutor named Monica Reyes reviewed our 52 recordings and confirmed every one of them was legally admissible under our state's single-party consent laws. Handwriting analysis on the forged signatures took only 15 minutes to confirm fraud, and the bank records sealed the rest: felony theft, identity fraud, elder abuse with clear intent to defraud. She told us arrest warrants would be issued that same afternoon and that the sheriff's department would coordinate service with the eviction proceedings. Diane had a second folder ready with eviction paperwork prepared for immediate filing, since property ownership was clear and no lease agreement existed anywhere. Official stamps hit the paperwork with a satisfying finality that afternoon, and Diane told me it would only take 48 hours before Preston and Vanessa were both out of my house and facing real criminal charges. I met with Deputy Harmon soon after, a tall, steady man with 20 years of experience handling family disputes, who told me elder abuse cases get priority attention in his county, because too many families destroy themselves over money and property. He reviewed our 52 recordings and told me plainly that this level of documentation over 6 months showed clear premeditation, that these were not heat-of-the-moment mistakes but calculated fraud. He scheduled the eviction to be served alongside the arrest warrants on Thursday morning at 9 sharp, explaining that timing it together gave maximum shock and minimum chance for them to destroy evidence. He handed me a temporary restraining order preventing them from accessing my financial accounts or my property, effective immediately, a piece of paper that felt strangely heavy in my hands. Legal protection I never should have needed from my own son. That same Wednesday afternoon, I sat with a bank fraud manager named Rita Alvarez, who confirmed the $12,000 in unauthorized charges matched perfectly with Vanessa's shopping patterns and my own visits to their house, proof of physical card access and clear identity theft. She reversed every fraudulent charge immediately and issued me new cards with new numbers, permanently canceling the old ones. While reviewing their joint account for property tax purposes, she noticed unusual activity, large cash withdrawals and closed savings accounts, which told us plainly they were preparing to run. Not anymore, she said, freezing every account connected to the fraud investigation on the spot. Thursday morning, December 28th, 9 sharp, 3 patrol cars rolled quietly into Preston's driveway. I sat across the street in my truck and watched Deputy Harmon walk up the sidewalk I had repaired myself the previous summer, 2 younger officers behind him carrying briefcases full of warrants. Preston answered the door in his pajamas, confusion turning to pale shock as Harmon read the charges aloud. Elder financial abuse, identity theft, attempted fraud. Vanessa appeared beside him, hair uncombed, insisting loudly this was impossible, that they had not done anything illegal, and Harmon calmly informed them both they also had 24 hours to vacate the premises due to fraudulent occupancy. Neighbors began stepping out onto porches all along the street, drawn by the quiet authority that always seems to follow court-ordered justice. Preston found my truck across the street through the windshield, and in that single look I saw the exact moment he understood his father was not the helpless old man he had spent months learning to manipulate. The handcuffs came next. Vanessa insisted the old man was lying, that he had given them permission for everything, until Harmon produced the digital recorder and told her plainly they had 52 separate recordings proving conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Her composure shattered completely as the cuffs clicked shut around her wrists. Preston stood frozen in the doorway, insisting he did not know anything, that he never signed a single document, that Vanessa handled all the paperwork. But Harmon calmly explained they also had recordings of him participating directly in the planning sessions. Upstairs, Chloe and Mason watched through a window as their parents were led away in restraints on a quiet Thursday morning, and Child Protective Services quietly arranged temporary custody with Vanessa's parents while the legal process unfolded. The moving company arrived right on schedule at 10, professional and respectful, packing up Preston's clothes, Vanessa's jewelry, the children's toys, and old wedding photographs that once represented a happier version of my son. I walked through that house one final time, rooms I had helped paint and furnish, a kitchen where I had washed hundreds of dishes as unpaid help, and by 3 that afternoon it stood completely empty except for the sound of my own footsteps, quiet, calm, and finally, entirely free. 2 months later, in a courtroom lined with dark wood paneling and an American flag standing tall behind the bench, Judge Loretta Banks reviewed every piece of our evidence, the 52 recordings, the documented credit card fraud, the forged property documents. Vanessa was sentenced to 18 months in state prison, suspended down to 6 months with 2 years probation, full restitution, community service, and a permanent ban from ever holding a real estate license again. Preston, convicted as an accessory to elder abuse, received 1 year probation, community service, and mandatory elder abuse awareness counseling. For the first time in months, my son looked directly across that courtroom at me, and what I saw in his face was not anger anymore. It was something closer to regret, maybe even recognition of the man he had allowed himself to become. The judge's gavel came down with total finality as she reminded the courtroom that family relationships do not excuse criminal behavior, that love does not justify theft, and that care does not permit manipulation. In the weeks that followed, Vanessa's real estate license was revoked permanently, and Preston's employer quietly let him go with a short email about personal reasons. Their social circle learned the full truth through courthouse records and neighborhood conversation, And the same college friends who once watched me scrub dishes on Christmas now understood exactly why. My neighbor Denise Coleman came by one afternoon with a plate of cookies and an apology, saying they should have said something sooner, that they could see how Preston and Vanessa treated me. Other neighbors followed with the same quiet kindness, offering yard work, dinner invitations, real concern I had not realized was there all along. My church invited me to speak during an elder protection service, and I stood in front of that congregation and told them elder abuse hides in plain sight, that it looks like helpful adult children managing their aging parents, that it sounds like concern for safety, that it feels like love right up until the moment you finally recognize the pattern for what it really is. That June, the old house on Maple Grove sold to a young family with twin daughters, full of the same hope Eleanor and I once carried 40 years earlier. I moved into a quiet, independent senior community, not assisted living, just a place full of neighbors my own age, morning coffee in the community room, a Tuesday book club, and volunteer work helping other elderly people protect themselves from exactly what I had survived. One single letter arrived at Preston's forwarding address that winter, handwritten on Eleanor's old stationery, sealed without a trace of anger inside it. It said simply, "Respect is earned daily. Choose wisely who you become. Love, Dad." No response ever came back. Maybe Preston was not ready yet. Maybe Vanessa's influence still lingered somewhere inside him. Maybe some wounds simply take years to heal properly. But that letter still exists. Proof that love can survive even the worst kind of betrayal, that a father can forgive even when he cannot fully forget, and that redemption waits patiently for anyone brave enough to finally choose character over convenience. If any part of this story feels familiar to you, if someone you love has slowly started treating you like a burden instead of a blessing, remember this. Quiet dignity is never weakness. Document everything. Save every piece of evidence. Trust your instincts the moment something feels wrong. Elder abuse survives through isolation, confusion, and shame, and the only way to defeat it is to break the silence completely. You deserve to be included in the conversation, not exiled to the kitchen. You deserve gratitude for everything you have sacrificed, not mockery in return for your generosity. Quiet dignity is simply preparation, waiting patiently for the exact moment justice finally becomes necessary. And sometimes, justice arrives wearing a sheriff's badge, driving a moving truck, and carrying with it the quiet satisfaction of one final, unforgettable lesson.